Thank you very much for the fantastic introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And I appreciate the characterization of myself as an interesting candidate, because I really do think that pretty much expresses where I am in coming into politics. As you know, I'm not a politician by nature. I've not been a politician by nature. I've been a physician. I've been a businessman. I've been a husband. I am a husband and a father. And I'm an extremely concerned and, frankly, a growing, increasingly irate citizen. Because if you look at the malpractice that we have in Washington today, if you look at the legacy of 22 years under Representative David Price and what the status quo of entitlement politics has given to our country, folks, it is time that we fill this room to capacity. The good news is I'm counting 40, 50 people in here who are committed, young folks, committed to changing our future. The bad news is we need thousands. And the work that we need to do starts today, starts now, and needs to go all the way through November. I left residency to start a software company. And it was in the process of starting and growing that business, I learned a couple of important things. The first thing I learned is that it is really difficult to start a company when you're supposed to focus on serving your clients and you start spending a ton of time and effort serving the government. As soon as you hire your first employment, bam! Thousands of pages of federal and IRS and other regulations show up on your desk. We started our business during the days of Sarbanes-Oxley and the fallout from that. People think that only affects large multinationals. No, it actually affects small businesses as well, startup companies. And if you look at the investment that we're driving overseas with a government that is increasingly hostile towards creating jobs in our own companies, people have got to start waking up and realizing that we can't keep doing what we're doing and expect different results. There are just a few numbers. I tend to be a numbers guy, without turning into Ross Perot and boring you with charts and graphs. There are a few numbers I really want to throw out there for y'all's consideration, okay? Because you're a young group. We're young people. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. And the numbers are 40, 50, and 60, okay? $40 trillion is approximately the GDP of the rest of the world besides the U.S. $40 trillion. Our American GDP is about 14. 50 is an estimate of all the household wealth, all the private wealth in the United States, $50 trillion. 60 trillion is the estimate of the long-term liabilities that our federal government has taken on in off-balance sheet entitlement programs. Social Security, Medicare. Now, anyone who's had a paycheck so far, you're paying money to Social Security, right? Does anyone in this room realistically expect to see any of that? No. No one's talking about that, folks. But the reality is, $60 trillion is frankly a meaningless number. When the rest of the world's GDP is $40 trillion, what are you going to do with that? And I try to talk to people about this. I try to ask them questions. Well, so what is that Social Security Trust Fund? What's in it? Well, it's a bunch of government bonds. So then you ask someone, well, hey, can you take a government bond and go down to the corner store and buy some milk and bread? Well, no, you need cash for that. You need dollars. Well, how do you turn those bonds into dollars? Well, you got to sell them. Who's going to buy that many bonds? Right? And funny enough, Alan Greenspan had a great quote on this topic back in 2005. Some of y'all who are economics junkies might have heard of this. He was asked at a congressional hearing about the Social Security entitlement burden and where all this money was going to come from. You know what Alan Greenspan said? This is great. This is classic. We can guarantee cash, but we can't guarantee purchasing power. Right? Do you get it? The government can print the money, but we can't guarantee that it's going to buy anything. And the reason I am so passionately concerned about what's going on in Washington, and so passionately concerned about the future that we are facing, that my children are facing, that hopefully my children's children will be facing, is that we are in uncharted waters economically today. We have a federal government that has been living so far beyond its means for so long. And despite the efforts of well-meaning conservatives who back in 1994 signed a contract with America, these guys went up there, and gals, went up there to Washington with a contract for America, and then all of a sudden the language changed from contract to America to what? To permanent majority. And as soon as the Republicans, as soon as the conservatives started thinking in terms of, well, maybe this contract's a good idea, but we need to make sure that we can be in power forever. We need a permanent majority. What happens? What happened at the national level? Conservatives, Republicans, start playing the same pandering game of trying to get reelected every year and allowing big government to get even bigger. And that's where we are today, folks. It's time to take our country back. We absolutely need to take our economy back, and the way we can do that is by following the rules. My simple message in this campaign is not, strictly speaking, a partisan message. And frankly, that's brought me a fair amount of criticism from folks within the Republican Party. But the bottom line is, I'm running in a district where the Republican challenger gets 35%, if he's good, if he's lucky, against David Price. This is not about winning by waving a Republican flag. There just aren't enough Republicans in Durham and Orange County. But there are lots of families and households in Durham and Orange County that are paying $3.30 for a gallon of gas, that are paying $4 or $5 for a gallon of milk. You look at what the food bills are doing, you look at what the gas bills are doing, and people are beginning to realize that it's all related. The first pebbles are rolling down the hill. The consequences of our $9.4 trillion national debt, our $800+ billion current account surplus, and the fact that we are so absolutely dependent upon selling debt to keep the lights on in Washington that prices keep going up. And I talked to folks in Chapel Hill or Durham about what their grocery bill has done versus what their salary has done. It's not a pretty picture. The way we can get people to realize that we've got a problem is we need to get them to ask and answer one simple question. The question is, can the federal government help us anymore? What's the answer? No! Sorry, no money, can't help you. The idea that we can continue going back to Washington, asking for more favors, asking for more benefits, it's lunacy, folks. The idea that the presidential candidates are touting health care reforms that involve raising taxes, absolutely that's crazy. It's nuts. The Medicare system today, this year, went cash flow negative, meaning there's more money going out than there is going in. But you know what? Doctors can't even stay in business based upon Medicare reimbursement. I've got a good friend and a neighbor who's a family practice physician in Cary. He's shuttering his practice. He's closing down, going out of business. Why? Because he just can't survive if he wants to spend more than 15 minutes with each patient. So he's going to leave his practice and go look for work in urgent care, where he can be more transaction-based and not worry about actually taking care of patients over the long term. We have a lot of problems. The answer to our problems does not rely on bigger government. And we as Republicans have got to get out there, and we've got to stop allowing the Democrats to claim that they have a monopoly over this idea of change. Right? The idea that Democrats can get out there and fill stadiums with people talking about change, when the change that they're talking about is more of what we've already been getting, bigger and bigger federal government in Washington, that's crazy. We need to be concerned about change. We need to be passionately committed to change, and the change that we need to articulate is change based upon a federal government that simply follows the rules, the Constitution. We've been ignoring it for 100 years. You read it as a thinking adult, you're like, gosh, this is nothing like we're doing in Washington today. Right, it isn't. To the extent that we continue this trajectory, we're not going to end up in a good place. But I am so optimistic and so hopeful because this message resonates. And regardless of whether I'm talking to Republicans or Democrats or independents, people that are seeing the same economic realities, being faced with the same challenges, begin to realize that, no, the federal government can't help us anymore. We've got to recognize this idea of separation of powers, that there are certain things, there are enumerated powers that the federal government should focus on, and everything else is about the states and the people. So I need your help. We need your help. We need to change the definition of a successful representative from one who brings back the pork from Washington, which is money that we don't have to spend in the first place, to one who is judged by his or her ability to follow the Constitution in the legislative process. So it's a tough message. It's a different message. It's one that we're not used to hearing. But I honestly believe that it is the message that can bring an end to 22 years of David Price's reign in the 4th District. Does anyone here think David Price needs to retire in 2008? That's good. I mean, and honestly, a lot of people out there realize it. So, in the tradition of Senator Smith, in the tradition of Bob Crumley, I'd also ask for your support. We're running an extremely active campaign, large grassroots component. We're canvassing every weekend. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the introduction and look forward to working with each and every one of you as we take this to David Price in November. Thank you very much.